Good morning. All right, here we go with chapter 7, A Day of New People. The next day, back in the plaza, Ben Barlow organized the residents of the Pioneer Hotel into teams. The teams would work together and eat lunch together. Each team would be led by someone from Sparks who would decide where the team's labor was most needed every day. Some days a team might work with the people of Sparks at the bakery, or the shoe workshop, or the wagon yard. Other days they might do a job on their own, such as repairing a fence or digging a ditch. Sooner or later, nearly everyone would have done nearly every kind of work. This was the best way to learn all the things, Ben said. Duke included his father, two teachers from the Ember School, Miss Thorne and Mrs. Polster, Clary Lane, the greenhouse manager, and Edward Pocket, the librarian, who would join them for lunch but not work with them because he was too old. Dune found Lena in the crowd for the first time he's seen her since they arrived. He told her about the Pioneer Hotel. She told him about the doctor's house and what she had learned from Torrin about the disaster. Lena and Mrs. Murdo were told that they would be a team of two with the job of helping Dr. Hester, since they were staying at her house. They were sent home, and all the other work teams went off to the very first project, digging the hotel toilets. They went out into the scrubby woods behind the Pioneer. The work leaders had brought picks and shovels from town. They gave each person a tool. You'll dig 50 holes, each one 6 feet deep. Then you'll build a shelter of scrap lumber around each one of the leaders told them. But the people of Ember had never done much digging or picking. They had to be shown how to put a foot on the shovel's edge to drive it into the dirt, and how to lift the pick over their shoulders and bring it back down hard. At first, they scraped and hacked awkwardly at the hard, dry earth, grunting with effort, dislodging only a few crumbs of dirt with each stroke. After 10 minutes of hard work, they had made barely more than shallow dips in the earth. They were breathing fast. "Did you say 6 feet deep?" someone called out. "That's right," came the answer. So the Emberites set themselves to the task, which was for most of them the hardest work they'd ever done. After an hour, Dune had blisters on both hands and a kink in his neck. Some of the others had given up entirely and had flopped down onto the ground, dripping with sweat and aching in every muscle. Dune made himself keep going, but he was glad when the work finally stopped at noon and the team leaders marched them back into town. He heard people murmuring to each other as they walked. "Do you think we'll have to work this hard every day?" "It'll make us strong, I guess, or it'll kill us." Each team was assigned to a different household for lunch. Dune's team went with the Parton family. Through the streets of the village, they followed a stout, cheerful woman named Martha Parton, whose wide rear end wagged from side to side as she walked. "Here we are," after a few minutes. She opened an unpainted wooden door and ushered her 6 guests inside. "Welcome to our home," she said. Dune looked around the low-ceilinged room. At one end was a long wooden table. At the other, a couple of benches stood before a niche in the smoke-stained wall. Sitting on the benches were two people, who got up and came forward as Martha introduced them. "My husband, Ordney," Martha said. He was tall and narrow with a mustache like a brown toothbrush under his nose. "And my son, Kensington." Kensington was a little younger than Dune, a skinny boy with yellow hair, big ears, and a freckled nose. He kept his eyes on the floor except for a couple of quick, curious glances. "Hi," he said to the floor in a soft, shy voice. "And these," Mrs. Parton said to her family, sweeping her arm in the direction of the guests, "are the people from underground." She raised her eyebrows at them. "You're lucky to have found your way here," she said. "The only other settlements we know of are little miserable ones hundreds of miles away. Everything else is just hard, rocky dirt and ruins and grass." "And you've not only come to the right place," added Ordney, "you've come at the right time. It's taken years of hard work, but Sparks is finally doing well." "Now," said Martha, clapping her hands, "time to eat." They sat down at the big table, and Martha brought out dishes of food. "I suppose you've never tasted anything like this," she said, handing around a bowl of fresh peas, "just picked this morning. And this is pumpkin bread, made from what I canned of last year's crop. Good, isn't it? Did you have pumpkin bread from where you come from?" "No, indeed," said Dune's father. "We did have peas, though," said Clary, "grown in our greenhouses." "And very fine they were," said Mrs. Polster loyally, "though slightly smaller than these." Probably you haven't had pickled carrots either, Martha said, passing the dish around. These are from my mother's famous recipe. We did have carrots, said Mrs. Polster, a nice pale orange, some of them fully 4 inches long. Is that right? Said Martha. Ours are usually 12 inches. Miss Thorne picked delicately at her food, making a polite comment every now and then. Edward Pocket ate with such a vigorous appetite that he had no time for talking. Kensington ate steadily and silently. Every time Doone glanced his way, he found the boy staring at him, but as soon as their eyes met, Kensington would look back at his plate. Ordney Parton cleared his throat. Apparently this meant he was going to speak, because his family all instantly looked at him. I never knew, he said, that there was a kind of people who lived underground. Must feel strange to you here on the surface. Actually, said Doone, we aren't a different kind of people. This place feels familiar in a way because we came from here originally. From here? Oh, I don't think so, said Martha. You don't look a bit like us. You're so much, well, smaller, and if you pardon me saying so, paler. True, said Clary, but I suppose that's because living in a dark place for so long, everything is bigger and brighter here. But why do you think you came from here? Martha asked. Because of a notebook we found, Doone said. It was written by someone from this world who went to live in Ember right at the beginning. All the people of Ember came from this world. Is that so? Said Martha, eyeing Doone skeptically. Well, I must say it's the strangest thing I've ever heard. Doone's father changed the subject. We have such a fine, solid house, he said. What is it made of? Earth, said Martha. Pounded, said Ordney. Strong as stone. Thick walls, said Martha. They make it cool in the hot weather and warm in the cold. She reached for another pickled carrot. I suppose you lived in, what, some sort of burrows? Stone houses, said Edward Pocket, suddenly joining the conversation because his plate was empty. 2 stories, extremely sturdy, never too warm. There was silence. Such a lovely lunch, said Miss Thorne in a small voice. Perfectly delicious, Mrs. Polster declared. The others chimed in, and Martha beamed. They all rose from the table. Martha scurried into the kitchen and came out with a basket full of cloth-wrapped parcels. She handed one to each of her guests. Your supper, she said, and breakfast. Thank you, said Doone's father. You're very generous. They filed out the door. Doone was the last one to leave. Just as he stepped outside, he felt a light tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Kensington standing behind him, his eyes wide. Aren't you the one that found the way out? He whispered. Doone nodded. I thought so, the boy said. He made a curious gesture, stuck out his hand with the fingers curled and the thumb straight up. Like this. Doone didn't understand it, but he thought it must mean something good because a shy smile went with it. Call me Kenny, the boy said, and he darted back through the door. Doone followed his father and the others down the street. He's heard of me, he thought. He felt a pleasant sort of glow. Of course, Kenny was just a little boy. It was natural for a young boy to admire an older one. All afternoon they worked on the toilet holes. Doone was ready to drop by the end of the day. When the work leaders let them go, he walked down the long slope of ground in front of the Pioneer Hotel to the river. Large stones border the water at this point. He found one that was flat on top and sank onto it, tired to the bone. The sun was setting. The western sky glowed pink. The trees on the other side of the river cast long, thin shadows across the ground. He sat for 10 minutes or so, just gazing, his thoughts whirling slowly. It was going to take the people of Ember, all 400 of them, several days just to build their outhouses, and already they were exhausted. How long before they got used to doing this kind of work? Doone couldn't imagine feeling so tired day after day. He had blisters on his hand, his wrists and shoulders ached, and the back of his neck felt hot and sore, as if it had been burned. And he was strong and young. What about the older people and the younger children? Of course they'd all have to work if they expected to be fed, but... His thoughts were interrupted by footsteps crunching behind him. He turned. There was Tick Hassler, walking toward him across the field. Doone's pulse quickened a little. Tick moved through the grass with a long stride, and when he came to the rocks alongside the river, he stepped from one to the next easily, never slipping or losing his balance. He raised a hand in greeting, and Doone waved back. Thinking deep thoughts? Tick said, coming up beside Doone and smiling down at him. Not really, said Doone, just watching things. Ah, said Tick. He put his hands on his hips and gazed out across the river. The setting sun shone on his face, making it glow, and draped his long shadow over the rocks. Dune wished he would sit down and talk. After a while, Tick said, "I'll tell you something." Dune glanced up quickly. Tick's eyes were as blue, so light it was almost startling. "This is a very fine place you brought us to," Tick said. "Yes," said Dune, pleased at being given credit. "You deserve a lot of respect," Tick said. "You may just be a kid, but you took action when things got desperate. You were brave." Ordinarily, Dune didn't pay much attention to what other people thought about him, but there was something about Tick that made it pleasing to have his good opinion. Somehow, he didn't even feel insulted at being called just a kid. "Thank you," he said. He thought surely Tick would sit down on the rock next to him now and they would talk, but instead he stepped onto another rock, closer to the water so that he had his back to Dune. They both gazed for a while at the reddening sky. Then Tick turned around and said, "Really a wonderful place. Just look at all this." He swept his arm in a wide arc, talking to the groves of trees, the fields, the river, the glowing red ball of the sun. "Yes," said Dune, "it is wonderful. We just need to get ourselves a little more comfortable," Tick said. "I have ideas already. We could fix up this old building first of all, get people organized and working together, get new glass for the windows, pipe some water in from the river. What do you think?" "Sure," said Dune. "Chet Nome wants to work with me. Lizzie Biscoe, too, and Allie Bright. What about you?" Tick said. "Sure," said Dune again, a little disappointed that Tick had talked to all these other people before him. "You'll be great on the pipe project," Tick said, "because of your experience." Dune nodded. Actually, there were lots of things he'd rather do than work with the pipes again, as he had in the Ember Pipeworks, but it might actually be fun to work on a plumbing project with Tick. Energy blazed from Tick's keen blue eyes. "There's so much to do," said Tick, and Dune waited to hear if there was an end of his sentence. But Tick didn't say any more. He just bent down, plucked a stone from between the bigger rocks, turned back to face the river, and threw the stone with all of his might. It sailed high up, a black dot against the scarlet sky, and came down with a splash in the shallow water on the far side of the river. Then he twisted around and smiled at Dune, an exuberant, radiant smile. "See you around," he said, and he stepped across the rocks, climbed up the riverbank, and went back to the hotel. When he was gone, Dune picked up a stone and flung it as hard as he could. It plunked down in the middle of the river. Not a bad throw, but not as good as Tick's. Chapter 8. The Roamer and the Bike. Several days passed. Poppy would get a little better and then a little worse, and Lena and Mrs. Murdo stayed with her nearly all the time, putting cool rags on her forehead and trying to get her to drink the medicine the doctor gave her. When Mrs. Murdo wasn't caring for Poppy, she was prowling around the medicine room, inspecting the doctor's jumbled collection of herbs and potions and powders, making notes in a tiny notebook and rearranging things, trying to create some order. Dr. Hester was often gone, seeing patients in the village, and when she was in the house, she was doing 10 things at once, or trying to, and being interrupted by patients who came to the door at all hours. It seemed to Lena that the people of Sparks were constantly cutting themselves, spraining their muscles, getting rashes, and falling ill. The doctor would give them medicine or bandage their wounds, and a few days later the patients would bring something in return: a basket of eggs, a jar of pickles, a bag of clean rags. Lena had never seen anyone so disorganized as the doctor. She peeked into the medicine room once when the doctor was out and was amazed at the clutter in there. Shelves and cupboards and tables piled with stuff in bottles, stuff in boxes, stuff in jars, all higgity-piggity. How Dr. Hester found anything, she just couldn't imagine. It took the doctor a couple of days even to get organized enough to figure out how Lena could help her, but when she did, she began giving her one chore after another, and sometimes several all at once, often forgetting that Lena didn't know how to do them. "Could you go water the asparagus?" she would say. Then before Lena could ask what asparagus was, and where to find it, and what to put the water in, she would say, "And then can you rip up some of those rags in the kitchen basket for bandages? And when you've done that, maybe you could wipe the floor in the medicine room. I spilled something the other day, I think by the window, and the chickens, they need to be fed." And then she'd be out the door, leaving Lena to remember the string of tasks and figure out how to do them. Everything here seemed extremely inconvenient to Lena. To get water, you had to go outside the gate to a pump and work a stiff handle up and down. To go to the bathroom, you had to go out in back of the house to a little smelly shed. There was no light at night except for candles, and at first she thought there was no stove to cook on. "Oh, yes," said the doctor, "that's the stove there." She pointed to the thing like a black iron barrel in the corner of the kitchen. "But I hardly ever use it in the summer. Too much trouble to keep the fire going, and it gets too hot. We mainly eat cold food in the summertime." When she did want to cook something, boil a pot of water to cook an egg, for instance, or make tea, the doctor had to squat down, stuff some dry grass and twigs into the stove's belly, and set them alight. Sometimes she used a match. Sometimes she hit what looked like two rocks together until they made a spark and the grass caught fire. Then she had to feed in bigger and bigger twigs until the fire was finally hot enough. This fire seemed fairly safe to Lena, though she didn't like to get too close to it. At least it was contained in the iron box. It wasn't free to leap out at her like the fire in the fireplace. Fortunately, the doctor didn't make another fire in the fireplace after that first night. As the days grew hotter and hotter, the nights were no longer cool. Extra warmth was the last thing that they needed. One day, a week or so after Lena first came to the doctor's house, a patient came with news to tell as well as a wound to bind. She was a scrawny young woman with brownish teeth. She had a bad scratch on her wrist where she had scraped it against some rusty wire. "There's a roamer in the village. Just arrived this morning." "What's a roamer?" Lena asked. The doctor, trying to rag around her patient's wrist, said, "Roamers go out into the empty lands and bring things back. From the old places," said the patient, "the ruined places." "My brother Casper is a roamer," said Torin, "and when I'm old enough, I'm going to be a roamer too, and we're going to be partners." This was the first time Lena had sensed real happiness in Torin. His little eyes shone a little bit with hope. "That'll be exciting," Lena said. "Is it dangerous to be a roamer?" "Oh, yes. Sometimes you run into other roamers trying to get the same things you want. Sometimes you're attacked by bandits. You have to fight them off. Casper has a whip." "A whip?" "A great long cord, as long as his room almost. If people get in his way, he lashes it." He lifted his arm overhead and brought it down as if he were lashing something. "Whoopsh, whoopsh," he said. "Oh, now stop that," said the doctor absently, trying to tie the final knot in the rag. The patient left, and Lena and the doctor and Torin, along with Mrs. Murdo, carrying Poppy, went down to the market plaza to see the roamer. A crowd had assembled in the plaza. Lena looked for Dune, but she didn't see him. She saw only a few Emberites, in fact. Most of them had been working in other places. But a great many villagers were there, clustered around a big truck. The truck was loaded with barrels and crates, and on it stood a brown-skinned woman with wiry muscles in her arms and legs. "I have been in the far north, out in remote corners of the empty lands. I have traveled roads where I saw no human beings for weeks on end, and in these distant regions I came across houses and farms that had never before been searched. I have treasures for you today. Step up and look," she said. The crowd pressed forward. Apparently this roamer was known for the villagers. Some people called out greetings and questions. "Did you bring us any writing paper this time, Mackie?" "What about some seeds?" "What about tools?" "And matches." "And clothes. I'm so tired of wearing homemade patchwork." "I have all that and more," the woman called. "Come close. Special things first." She bent over an open crate and rummaged around for a moment. When she stood up again, she was holding a blackened iron cooking pot, so big she had to use both hands to lift it. "What am I offered?" she cried. "Half a bushel of dried apricots, a bushel of peas, barrel of cornmeal." The woman listened, cocking her head, her eyebrows raised. She waited until the offer stopped, and then she pointed at a tall young woman with shiny black hair who had offered 5 loaves of apricot cornbread. "Done," she said, and she lowered the pot into the young woman's hands. For the next special thing, the roamer reached into a big cardboard box. She brought out a smaller box, colored blue, and it said, "Soap flakes, 24 boxes of them." Dozens of people bid for these. They were all gone in minutes. Then came more cooking pans, books, a pair of scissors, some doorknobs, some nails. There were a few odd, useless things, too. For half a dozen carrots, one woman brought a pair of faucets, one with an H and one with a C. "What will you do with them?" asked Lena. People here got their water from lawn-handled pumps that stood at certain spots in the village. No one had indoor running water. I'll turn them upside down, said the woman. They'll make good candle holders. When the roamer brought out a handful of jewels, Lena gasped. She had never seen such things. Necklaces and bracelets made of gleaming stones and silver chains, but only a few people seemed interested in them, and they bid hardly anything. One girl bid a couple of potatoes, but a man got them for a slightly used pair of sandals. If my wife them to pretty up my oxen. The roamer brought out the last of her wares: packets of paper, boxes of safety pins, some spoons and forks. The doctor stepped up to buy a small set of glass bottles. Dr. Hester, the roamer said, good to see you. You too, Mackie. It's been a long time, said the doctor. I was hoping you'd be here. I ran into your nephew the other day. Gasper? Cried Torrin in a voice so piercing that several people looked up. Where is he? He was up in the apple country. I told him I was coming down here, and he said to tell you he's heading for home. Is that right? Said the doctor. She was clearly not as excited as Torrin. We haven't seen him in quite a while. 1 year, 10 months, and 19 days, said Torrin. When will he be here? Did he say? Should be soon, said the roamer. She was putting the little bottles into a cloth bag. I guess within the next 2 weeks or so. When the roamer's sale was over, Lena walked home alongside the river road with the doctor and Mrs. Murdo and Poppy, who was asleep in Mrs. Murdo's arms. Torrin leapt ahead, his thin legs splaying out sideways. He bounced off steps, jumped onto walls, leapt up to grab branches of trees, and swung up them. As they neared the doctor's house, Torrin, who was way ahead of them by now, suddenly turned around and raced back. You have to get out of your room, he said to Lena and Mrs. Murdo. My brother will want his own room back, and he'll want to be with me. You have to move. Fine, said Lena. We will. We'll go live with our own people as soon as Poppy's well enough. Torrin's face lit up. Good, good, good. When are you leaving? Not today, Lena said. Not right this minute. But soon, Torrin cried. He skipped ahead of them again, through the gate and across the courtyard. The doctor said not to mind Torrin. He was being rude because he was so excited. But it seemed to Lena that Dr. Hester didn't see clearly when it came to Torrin. He wasn't rude just when he was excited. He was rude nearly all the time. The doctor was so preoccupied with her work that she hardly noticed him. Maybe if she paid him more attention, Lena thought, he wouldn't be so awful. Oh, but he was awful, and Lena would be glad to get away from him. 2 weeks, she thought. Then we'll meet Caspar the Great, and if Poppy is well by then, Torrin can have his room back, and we'll go live with Dune and the others. Now and then, Lena saw people on wheels going by on the road in front of the doctor's house. The only wheeled vehicles Lena had ever seen were the heavy wooden carts in Ember, but these people were riding beautiful, slender devices, 2 big wheels per person. They glided by, their feet going round and round. She wanted to do it so badly she wanted to. What are they? She asked the doctor. Bikes, of course. You've never seen one? No, said Lena, looking at a bike with longing. If she could have a bike, she thought, she could go even faster than she ran. She could go so fast and so far. She looked out toward the endless rolling hills. She could go everywhere. She could go to wherever the roads ended. I wish I could ride one, she said. Well, you can if you want, said the doctor. There's an old one out behind the tool shed. I suppose it still works. There is? Lena nearly dropped her basket of eggs that she had just gathered. May I get it now? I guess so, said the doctor. But would you mind watering the parsley first? And if you could just shell those peas, and maybe wash the spinach? Lena did these tasks in a fever of impatience, and when she was finished, she dashed out to the shed. The bike was leaning against the shed wall. It was old but beautiful, made of wires and slender pipes and rods, some of them silver under their coat of dust, and some of them red. Thin, weedy vines wove among the spokes of the bike wheels, and the cobwebs draped its seat. Lena took hold of the 2 handles and pulled the bike from its nest. She wheeled it out onto the road in front of the house and brushed the cobwebs and dry leaves and bits of grass off of it. And then she swung one leg over and settled herself onto the seat. Now what? She spent the rest of the morning figuring it out. She pushed on the pedals, rolled forward, tipped over sideways, and had to put her feet down. She rolled forward again, but she didn't know how to turn. She fell off. She heaved the bike upright and tried again. She fell off again. After an hour or so of this, she gave up and went inside for a while. And later, when she tried again, something had changed. She had the feel of it in her legs now, or somewhere in her. She rolled forward. She put a foot on the pedal and pushed. Rolled farther again. She brought up the other foot, and magically her body understood what to do. She was sailing. Her feet were going round and round. A smile broke over her face. She held on, feet going around, breathless, breeze against her face, a whole long distance, maybe 5 yards, before suddenly she was nervous and dragged her feet along the ground to stop. She stood holding the handlebars, her mouth open in amazement. And by the end of the day, she had it. She could ride back and forth on the road. She could stop whenever she wanted to. She could even turn around corners without having to put a foot down. "I'm going to go see Dune," she told Mrs. Murdo. She was longing to see Dune, longing to talk to someone she really knew. Mrs. Murdo was fine, of course, but she was a grown-up. Lena wanted to be with a friend. She got on the bike and rode, sweeping down the river road onto the plaza, where she asked someone for directions, and out the other side of town to the hotel. When she got there, she stopped for a moment just to stare. The enormous old building looked to her like a wonderful place to live. She felt a sudden longing to have her own room there, back among her old friends and neighbors. It was nearly evening by then. People were sitting on the hotel steps in the last rays of the setting sun, eating their dinners from their food parcels and talking. Some were down by the river, cooling their feet, splashing water onto their faces. Over by the farthest wing of the hotel, a few boys were gathered around another boy who was sitting on a fallen tree talking to them. Maybe Dune was over there. She wheeled her bike toward them. The ground here was too rough and weedy to ride on. Her old friends and neighbors called out as she passed and waved to them, glad to be back among people she knew. When she got closer to the group of boys, she saw that Dune was among them. He and a couple of others were listening to the tall, dark-haired boy. What was his name again? Tig? Tim? He'd been a cart puller in Ember, she thought. He laughed as she came up, a ringing, confident laugh, and all the other boys started laughing too. She went up behind Dune and tapped him on the shoulder. He turned around. She grinned at him. "Look, Dune, I have a bike," she said. He seemed surprised to see her. "Oh, Lena." "Come and talk to me," she said. His eyes shifted back toward the tall boy. "Okay," he said, but he didn't move. "Come on," said Lena, tugging at his jacket. They walked down toward the river. Lena leaned the bike against a tree, and she and Dune sat facing each other on the ground. "What a huge place," she said, waving an arm at the Pioneer Hotel and talking fast in her eagerness. "What's it like? Will you show me around? Poppy's a little better, and maybe in a couple of weeks we can come and live here too, with you and with everyone." Dune nodded. "That would be good," he said. "It's kind of lonely at the doctor's house. There's a boy there who doesn't like us. And the doctor is so busy she can hardly think, and her house is a mess, and I have a million chores to do. And today we saw a roamer, Dune." "A roamer?" She explained what a roamer was. Dune listened, but she saw his eyes looking back toward the group of boys. "Who is that boy, the one who's talking?" "Tig Hassler," said Dune. Lena turned around and looked at him. He was handsome, she thought. His black hair was thick and glossy, and his face was all sharp angles, as if it had been carved from wood. "Is he a friend of yours?" "Sort of," said Dune. "I mean, I'm just getting to know him." "Oh," said Lena. "Do you know which room Lizzie is in?" Dune said he didn't. "I don't stay inside very much. It's kind of dark and dismal in there. What I like is being outside." He pointed up into the branches of the tree where little fluttering things were hopping around. "Remember when we first saw those? We had just come up from Ember. I learned that they're called birds. When you start really looking at them, you see there's all different kinds. I've seen ones with a yellow chest and runs, ones with stripes on their wings, ones with red heads. There's even one that's bright blue. It's strange, isn't it? We have all these different kinds, I wonder, just for the fun of it." A burst of laughter came from the group of boys around Tig Hassler. Dune glanced over. "Do you like it here, Dune?" Lena said. "In the village of Sparks, I mean." "I do," said Dune. "I like it a lot." "Me too," said Lena. "Mostly." "But it sort of worries me that we have to leave in 6 months," Dune said. "There's so much we need to learn." "Well, I guess so," said Lena. "But maybe if we leave, I still wish—" "Wish what?" said Dune when she trailed off. "Oh, I don't know." She'd been going to say she wished they had found the city she used to dream of, but she was afraid Dune might think she was silly. The sun was going down. Shadows were growing longer. "Show me your room before I have to go," Lena said, "so I know where to find you." Tig was walking away and the other boys were following him. Dune gazed over. "I can't right now," he said. "I will the next time you come." "All right," Lena said. She got up from the ground and swatted the leaves of her plants. She picked up her bike. I'll see you sometime, she said, and she rode back to the doctor's house, feeling lonelier than she had before. That was the end of chapter 8. I will read more tomorrow. Me and Jupiter wish you an awesome rest of your Thursday, and just as always, can let me know how you guys are doing on Google Classroom or send me a message through Class Dojo. Get out, do some more reading, enjoy the sunshine, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.